Okay, I'm told that we're live. Welcome to this Manhattan Borough President Candidate Forum organized by the Upper West Side Coalition of Block Associations and Community Groups. My name is Chris Giordano and I serve as the head of the West 64th through 67th Streets Block Association, and I'm president of this coalition. A dozen block associations and community groups have launched this organization, and already more have joined us, reached out and joined us. We recognize that our community benefits from diverse and inclusive neighborhoods, and we are committed to creating an open and welcome environment. On this first anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, there are many issues before us. Thank you to all who are joining us for this forum. The borough presidents play a crucial role on the land use, the annual municipal budget process, and appointments, including community board members. The Democratic primary is being held on June 22nd, with early voting starting on June 12th. This election includes ranked choice voting. Our format is simple. Candidates, please keep your answers to 2 minutes, and you will have 1 minute for a closing statement. Let me now turn the forum over to our two moderators who will introduce the candidates and get us started. Dee Reber is president of the West 75th Street Block Association, one of the founding groups at the launch of the coalition, and Steve Anderson leads the Theodore Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association of West 81st Street and is the inaugural chair of the coalition's board of directors. Steve.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you, everybody. It is very exciting for us with our new organization, and we are glad that all 6 of the candidates are able to join us. I'm going to introduce you in alphabetical order, and that's how we'll go through the first question, and then we'll mix it up as we go along. Welcome, Lindsey Boylan, Elizabeth Caputo, Brad Hoylman, Ben Kallos, Mark Levine, and Kimberly Watkins. We'll adjust the order as I said, but that's how we'll start. And now to my neighbor from West 75th Street, Dee Reber, so we can get started with the first question.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome everybody. It's great to see you here tonight. So our first topic is on civic engagement. Do you have, or I should say, what specific proposals do you have to ensure that community boards are representative and diverse? And in addition to that question, how will you give voice to other organizations such as block associations throughout the borough? We're going to start again, alphabetical order for this question. Lindsey, take it away.
So I served in my early times on CB7 when I first got to New York, and then CB5. I love community boards and what they can do, but they could be a lot more diverse. And I think this past year, this exercise in remote engagement isn't perfect. It excludes a lot of people, but it's an important addition to all we engage. And you just saw my daughter, which was not intentional, but there are a lot of people who just can't come to meetings. There are a lot of people who can't make the time in person for a lot of reasons. And that means a lot of people get left out of the system, just like a lot of caregivers have been left out of the process. A lot of people who have mobility issues have been left out of the process. And one of the things I'm going to do is not replace in-person membership and engagement, because that's critically important, but you should be able to be a full community board member and remotely engage. I know several people from our broader disability community, for example, who need that kind of accessibility. So that's one thing. I think also the topics that we lead with about engaging on the future and making permanent open streets and things like outdoor cafes and community spaces and linear parks, and how we're going to respond to issues of safety and livability and systemic racism. The issues and a genuine show that we're actually going to address them on community boards, and that community boards are going to be resourced with, for example, planning assistance and more funding from the borough president's office, will lend itself in part on top of a broad outreach to different groups. I don't think community boards are nearly as representative as they should be, as diverse as they should be. And someone who came from not the same world as block associations, but the bid world in my first decade in New York, I think that these are key ways that we get people's buy-in and engagement on community boards. You say you can have an active role in deciding how we make your community livable and safe, and how we invest in it. And I think we need to empower boards more than we have, give more opportunities for people to engage, and frankly, make it the reality that community board members are people that I report to, not the other way around. And I think we've gotten out of that system where electeds feel that community board members end up working for them. And I think that's all backwards.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Dee, and thanks, Steve and Chris and all the Block Association presidents. And congratulations on forming the new organization. I'm excited to be a part of it as a resident of West 69th Street, and I think Eileen Vasquez is probably on the call tonight. Look, I appreciate the chance to be heard tonight. I think I'm the only person on this call tonight who's still a member of my community board. I could be wrong about that, but so I have been a chair for 3 years on the Upper West Side of Community Board 7. I'm the chair emeritus, and I continue to serve and have done so for over a decade. I believe really strongly in the mission of community boards. I agree with a lot of what Lindsey said. One of the things I did when I was chair was really try to diversify not just board membership, but board leadership, and make sure that we were doing the appropriate outreach into every community within here on the Upper West Side. So that meant hosting, a couple things. It meant hosting meetings across the district, not just at our community board office. It meant putting people in positions of leadership, which is one of the powers of a board chair, and something I would do as borough president as well, is to make sure that we are reflecting the great diversity of a given neighborhood across the way. And as borough president, one of the things I have said consistently in my campaign speeches has been the importance of getting out into the community. There are two offices for the borough president. One is at 1 Center Street, one is at 125th Street. I've committed to my office being at 125th Street. I've also committed to making sure that the borough board meetings, which is a requirement of a board chair, for those of you, and I think our elected officials, city council members have participated in those as well and attend them. We need to be diversifying how and when we get out at those meetings and doing them. There are 12 borough board meetings a year. There should be 12 locations where we host them, and they should be in a different neighborhood, one that reflects each of the 12 community board districts each month. But just to go back specifically to my experience on the community board and why I think it's so important for grassroots organizing and getting people involved. The block associations do this too. I see it as a very non-political job. One of the best things that I found during my 10 years on the board is that I never really knew the politics of the people I worked with. I just knew they cared about their block. They cared about cleaning up their street. They cared about a bike lane. They cared about the museum or about cleaning something up. They cared about their local neighborhood. And as your borough president, nobody is going to work harder block by block and neighborhood by neighborhood. So thank you again for this chance to speak tonight, and I look forward to the continued discussion.
Thank you. Brad.
Thanks, Dee. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Steve. Congratulations on your new superstructure of community boards. And Chris, thanks in particular for acknowledging the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. I think it points to an important need in our community boards actually to weigh in on social justice issues, because they are so central to our lives as New Yorkers and frankly, as Americans. I was a community board member for 10 years, a chair for 3. I understand how they work, and I understand how important they are to the borough presidency, but also to local elected officials like me and Ben and Mark. They really are the town halls of our local democracy. A few changes that I'd like to see to empower them. One, we need to remove paid lobbyists and the staff of elected officials. Believe it or not, they're allowed to serve on community boards. I'd like to use a Rooney Rule, they call it in corporate America, where you interview a diverse pool to get a diverse selection for community boards, because we know that through Gail Brewer's analysis and Beta NYC that certain groups are underrepresented on community boards. Folks with disabilities, Asian Americans, women, non-college graduates, young people. I'm proud to have co-sponsored legislation, D, that would allow 16-year-olds to serve on the board, and I think that's been very positive. I also want to see boards take a bigger role in their work. We need to ensure that community boards actually are able to put some bang in the buck when they draw up those capital needs requests. I want to institute something, taking a page out of my council colleagues on the Zoom here, instead of participatory budgeting, which has been successful for council members, I want to use something called community board budgeting, where I ask community boards to help the borough president determine the use of capital dollars. It's something I've done as a state senator. And I also want to, in my first 100 days of office, have all 12 community boards have the opportunity to launch their own 197A community-based planning process. They can identify issues. It's not always a community rezoning. It could be a focus on homelessness or city services or parks as a formal document so the community board can get out front with those needs. And I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by 2 former borough presidents, including Ruth Messinger today and C. Virginia Fields, along with our Congressman Jerry Nadler. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Ben.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I want to thank Chris, Steve, Deanna for your leadership. All of you have shown just how this is not just about the borough president, but that we're actually a borough of presidents. And all of you have lent your expertise to leading fights that I think people underestimated the community every single time. I'm Councilmember Ben Kallos. I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because anywhere else in America, people struggle to get out, but here in New York City, people are struggling to stay, and I want to fix that. I've been a lifelong tenant, and I spent most of this pandemic in a 1-bedroom with my wife and daughter, and I can tell you that we have an affordable housing crisis because real estate developers get whatever they want from elected officials that take their money. That's why I've always refused their money, and I never will take their money. And that's freed me to fight for affordable housing. And when no one did anything about 432 Park Avenue and Billionaires Row got created and kept growing, that pissed me off. And so I ran for office. And I got my start on CB8, and I was so pissed off that elected officials just ignored the hell out of us. And so as a council member, I've always had my community boards back. And I led a grassroots rezoning to stop Billionaires Row. No other elected official has ever done it, not even anyone on this call. And when we started to see super talls popping up on the Upper West Side, I took the momentum of what I did on the East Side and brought it to the West Side, working with Chris and others to do whatever we could to block the super tall with 150 feet of nothing. They'd rather build nothing than affordable housing. There's nothing more cynical. And we won that rezoning, and we've been in court, and we need a court that isn't in the pockets of real estate. But we won that rezoning, and if we want to stop Billionaires Row, I'm going to need to be borough president because that's the only way DCP is going to do that next step. And when it comes to CB8, I see the pen has gone up. I can go into diversifying the community board and a lot of the work that I've been able to do there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you so much, Dee. Congrats to you, to Chris, to Steve for the formation of this incredibly important new group. And I'm really honored to speak to you now about what's at stake in this election for the Upper West Side at a moment of real challenges for our borough, real opportunities as well. The public health challenge, the economic shock, quality of life issues, and also a confrontation with inequality that has been so revealed over the past year as we mark the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. A lot to talk about tonight. I think that block associations are going to be key to so many of these questions, really everything related to public space, from parks and street trees, sanitation, public safety, street and traffic policy, homeless policy. All of it impacts the blocks we live on, and block associations should have a voice in how that policy is set. You know, in the 70s financial crisis, block associations played a really important role in the comeback of the city. That was the emergence of Citizens Committee of New York. I'm sure you've been in touch with them. And I'd love to see them have a big role in the comeback of the Upper West Side and the borough at this time as well. And as borough president, I'll be committed to empowering and partnering with block associations in some of the policy arenas that I mentioned. Of course, those issues are the bread and butter of community boards, I'm proud to have served for 5 years on Community Board 12 and to have worked closely with CB 7, 9, and 12 in my years in the City Council, and to have appointed a really diverse group of members across those 3 boards, 65% of whom are people of color. But we have to do better on diversity across a lot of other different kinds of diversity. And Brad mentioned a number of them. We need more young people. We need more union members. We need more small business owners. We need more people with disabilities. And I will work to not just state goals for diversity, but go out and recruit people actively, go to public housing developments, go to schools, go to chambers of commerce to recruit the diversity that we need, the voices we need on our community boards. The pen is up. I look forward to a great discussion over the course of this hour and a half. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Last but not least for this question, Kimberly.
Hi, and Dee, you can call me Kim. Kimberly is reserved for my mother when I get into trouble. Still is the case, even though I'm not living with her anymore. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chris and Steve and Dee. And it's really great to be here this evening. And congratulations again on the new organization, the superstructure. I like that term. I don't remember who said that, but for the super talls, we need the superstructure, right? You know, I also just want to take a moment to honor the memory of George Floyd, and I appreciate that it was introduced already this evening. We have so much to talk about. I actually was with my team canvassing down by Police Plaza today when I got notified that there had been gun violence on my block and that a bullet had struck a window of my neighbor. And no one was hurt, but I had to rush home to be with my daughter who was at home alone in Zoom school. So it has been a really bad day for me. I am the only person in this race that has not served on a community board. And I proudly say that in some ways because though I chose a different path in public service, I started out in public service in the 2-4 precinct as an auxiliary police officer. In 2001 and dutifully served the beat on Broadway until I got married and ended up in mom zone for some years with a little one, but then chose the school system for my next level volunteering. And where I ended up is on the CEC as the president of CEC 3, which is the Upper West Side in Lower Harlem, where I live. Specific to your question, and I want to get to that before the pen comes up. I have an idea that's completely different from everybody else here. I actually think that we need to start electing community board members. And I say that because I am working very closely right now with middle school students in a program we call Model CEC. And students, middle schoolers and high school students really want to participate in civic engagement, which was how you started your question. So I think that if we were to use that 14-year-old participatory budgeting age and invoke a process for us to elect leaders of our communities more democratically, we'd see a lot of excitement in New York. And I can't wait to talk more about it. I'll be quiet from the pen.
Thank you. Steve.
I want to switch to the issue of land use. And we know that the borough president has a significant role in land use issues. There are currently 10 historic districts and 3 historic district extensions on the Upper West Side. Is it your opinion that these neighborhood designations are in fact prohibiting housing affordability in our community? Let me first turn to Elizabeth.
Great, thanks. I've said consistently on this issue that every neighborhood, when it comes to the ULURP process, every neighborhood when it comes to land use needs to do its part. As all of you know, I think from this call, I have worked hour by hour and day by day as a community board chair on land use issues in our neighborhood on the Upper West Side. As a protocol for public review, I support the ULURP process. However, I think many of the land use decisions are often well in motion before ULURP even begins. So developers are able to amass all these properties without any public notice, and then they spring forward with these giant combined lots. We all know this from 200 Amsterdam. They surprise, they overwhelm our neighborhoods. ULURP needs to be augmented to include early warnings to community boards. And again, I'm sticking to the things that the borough president can actually do, not the visionary ideas that it potentially could do, but the things they actually could do in this case include triggering early warnings to community boards and other interested parties as the developer acquires properties in the district. I will say that whoever gets elected to this job is going to need to be somebody who is able to work with all communities, including block associations, tenants associations, owners, people who live in a given neighborhood, and also developers. And we have to be able to get things done responsibly. We're on an island that can no longer build out. So we have to think about how we're going to keep people here, and we have to do it in the most responsible way. And it's going to require somebody who knows neighborhoods and local community boards. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Brad, please.
You know, I'd say no, generally speaking. I mean, historic districts are historic districts for a reason. And I think we need to do everything we can to preserve their integrity. That's just the way I feel. I think puncturing districts left, right, and center, as this administration has attempted to do, is bad policy. And generally speaking, doesn't further the public good. I've seen it happen in my own neighborhood where the LPC is letting go forward a 213-foot tower in the Greenwich Village Historic District. Get this, Steve, 0 affordable housing. So, I mean, we're obviating the integrity of the historic district and not even getting any affordable housing out of it. Of course, Soho NoHo is an infamous example too of that, where it's a broad brushstroke to, undermine the integrity of that amazing district with some scraps of affordable housing. At least there's a scrap in that plan. Still not enough. I think you should have a very high bar, a very high threshold to undo the confines of a historic district. I believe that affordable housing is one of the goals that could and should be presented in that case, but it's got to be much higher than what we've seen on the offing from this city administration. Otherwise, again, what's the point? And I don't believe, previous generations were wrong, but I believe we are really hurting future generations if we don't appreciate and understand the history, the placemaking, the scale of this magnificent island, just as other world cities have protected their historic districts. New York City should be doing the same.
Thank you, Brad. Ben, please.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best to answer the previous question where I didn't really get to it, and this one in the allotted 2 minutes. So I'll split it minute a minute. I got my start on Community Board 8, and when I finally got elected, what I did is I stopped appointing people who had stopped showing up. I started taking attendance. There's lots of press about it, but that allowed me to have a 25% turnover. I worked with Gail Brewer. We passed a resolution to put teens on community boards, and the biggest fight she and I have in our relationship ever is who gets to appoint the high school students. And so we have more representation from youth on my board. We've been appointing more residents from public housing. We've appointed more people of color, school teachers, laborers, leaders from community organizations. We actually ask people, are you a member of a community organization? And we reach out to leaders like you to say, do you have somebody to nominate? It's actually in the charter. And so our Community Board 8 is much more representative. It's gone from very pro-development, anti-union to pro-preservation, pro-affordable housing. And we just passed a near unanimous resolution for homeless shelters. When it comes to historic districts, I'm the preservationist on the city council. I'm the preservationist in government that everyone ends up coming to. And that scares me to death because I know nothing about architecture. absolutely nothing. Couldn't tell you about a historic cornice if my life depended on it. When the city council tried to gut the landmarks law on its 25th anniversary or 50th anniversary, I was the one who was leading the charge to protect our landmarks. I believe that our preservation of historic districts actually protects affordable housing, rent-regulated housing, which is always more affordable than whatever the mayor is shilling. And I'm not going to use anecdotal information. I'm a data-driven type person. And so recently, DCP said that the Upper East Side, which has had more construction than anywhere else in Manhattan, wasn't doing enough new units because when you netted out all the units we lost, then we weren't really getting new ones. And when we looked at it, what we saw was that half of the units we lost in the district were from rent regulated and older buildings going down. So historic districts are an excellent tool to preserve affordable housing. And that's what we're seeing in Soho, NoHo. I did a lot of the data work and with Andrew Berman and that group. And that's what we need in a borough president, a data junkie who can actually make the points, protect the housing, and prove why we need to protect it. And I just saw Steve's pen, which is a little bit off. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark, please.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. Really important question. You know, we have multiple imperatives that we have to move forward on in land use. We have a desperate need to create more affordable housing. This is really a crisis for so many New Yorkers now, even coming out of the pandemic. But we've also got to preserve the integrity of neighborhoods and the historic legacy of this city. I've been able to achieve those goals in my district. We created the Morningside Heights Historic District, which has preserved 115 buildings in perpetuity. I'm incredibly proud of that effort. We're also pushing forward a rezoning plan for Morningside Heights, which I think strikes the right balance. It would institute a height limit of 75 feet mid-block and 160 feet on the avenues, but would also add density to Broadway and Amsterdam, and that would trigger a requirement for affordable housing. We're actually going to go greater density at the transit hubs, especially 125th Street, and could potentially get an elevator and other accessibility improvements thanks to that. So this is the kind of balance that we need borough-wide, and we can do it. Community boards, block associations, neighborhood voices are going to be key in striking that balance. And I've proven I can do that in my district, and I'll take that balanced approach citywide, borough-wide. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Kim?
Thank you. This is such a great question, and one of the agreeing with most of everything that my colleagues have said. I am really concerned about the lack of affordable housing, especially when it comes to sort of looking at the future and where we have all of this vacant space and how many especially uptown Manhattanites are doubled up and tripled up in crumbling housing and in supportive housing, and where homelessness has been exacerbated through the pandemic. We have a crisis on our hands that is not of the makings of regular people, an economy that doesn't support jobs that pay a living wage. And if we don't get a handle on making sure that people have a place to live, we are simply not going to thrive as a city. I believe that protecting historic districts is really important. I agree with that. However, one of the things that I think is somewhat antithetical to protecting sort of our entire city's perspective and the homelessness and affordability crisis that we have in Manhattan is that in other districts, there isn't necessarily the same level of fight, the same level of energy put into the protection of historic district, which is where you'll see in some parts of the borough, there is this rapid gentrification, overdevelopment gone completely amok, like in Harlem, in central Harlem right now. So we have a lot of work to do. I think part of it is having a more of a borough-wide and city-wide planning process. I think we have to take time, I like Elizabeth's plan with early warning on ULURP, because I think part of it is that we simply don't know what's going on behind the closed doors. We don't even really know who owns what at this point, right? I mean, some of it is simply a function of understanding who the players are and who's making the decisions, because we know that it comes down to the debate between the planning commission, the developers, and the community often is sort of disregarded through the approval process. So I am in favor of comprehensive engagement with all of our communities in terms of moving these big issues forward. But I do think at the heart of it, we need citywide and borough-wide plans in order to protect all of our neighborhoods equally.
Thank you so much. Lindsey?
A lot of good has been said. My first experience with preservation in the Upper West Side was on the Parks and Preservation Committee on CB7. And I had come to New York because I was a huge fan of Jane Jacobs, and issues of preservation and livability were so key to me. In my view, a lot of the conversation against historic preservation and historic districts is really a red herring in a lot of ways, because these historic districts are what give character to our communities, that give them the scale of livability, and we would not want them to go away. In fact, as Kim points out, there should be more equity in preserving different parts of our city and our history and our cultural heritage. I'm seeing increasingly that a big real estate driven political agenda is to make certain groups like historic districts and people who care about these things, and parks even in some cases, the bad guys. When in reality, I think a lot of the issues we have around development, around the ULURP process, around upzoning has to do with big real estate interests that don't actually get us more affordable housing, whether we're talking about these displacement vehicles called mandatory inclusionary housing. We're talking about all the different programs that when development sites get acquired and go through this process, we're actually not changing the ratio of affordability in the city. We're just continuing it. And I think rather than kind of having these hard conversations about the way that we should be developing in this city and who it should be for, which is related to deeply affordable housing, supportive housing, or senior housing, it's easier to malign groups that, are easy targets. And I think I've seen a lot of it, and I think it's insidious. And I think we have to fight against it, because I think that's a big part of the reason why I came to New York, and what I love about the Upper West Side, what I love of, historic districts that have yet to be preserved in some sense. The much bigger fight we have is to get affordable housing, and that is not being held up by preserving our historic districts.
Thank you, Lindsey. Before we move to the next question, there is a lot of chat and a lot of concern about these issues within our community and hearing it. Let me ask this, by show of hands, who among you would pledge not to prohibit, who would say that they will not, as borough president, seek to take away the historic district designations that are currently in force? So by a show of hands, half hand, so
you're
okay,
asking who will protect?
Who will protect? Who will pledge not to change what we have? So I guess that's everyone. So one of you will be our next borough president, and we will hold you to that. And we have pictures of you pledging to that. And I thank you for that. I also thank you very much for including block associations in the focus of your responses, because that is what this organization is really all about. So thank you for that. Dee?
Thank you, Steve. So the next question is one that's near and dear to all of you. You've all spoken about it, education. So how would you use your office to find a solution for opportunity gaps in our local District 3 public schools, which serve families from 59th Street to 122nd Street? And we'll start with Mark Levine.
Well, it's great that Chris is on this call, who's been a really important parent leader at a school in my district, a District 3 school, MS 54 Booker T on 108th Street, which was one of the schools that I really believe benefited from a very successful implementation of policy to integrate our schools. And kudos to Kim, who's a CEC3 member, who I know is very, very involved in forming that policy. This dedicates 1/4 of the seats at middle schools throughout CEC3 to people who score 1s and 2s on standardized tests. And that de facto has led to added diversity, particularly at some of the more selective schools like Booker T. And it was implemented before the pandemic, so we got a view of it. It had a very successful start. And I believe it proves that we can bring kids together from different backgrounds and ability levels and still have a thriving, diverse community. So kudos to CEC3 for putting that policy forward. That's the kind of thing I'd like to see for every district and citywide. This is a challenge that we have to confront. We have to find a way to bring kids from different backgrounds together to integrate our schools, and to do it in a way that maintains academic excellence, that ensures every child is challenged to the best of their abilities. And this is not easy. It requires a lot of work. It requires community building. But here again, it requires grassroots voices being elevated. And I'm not sure education is exactly in the portfolio of block associations, but I know that many of you are parents like Chris, and I've valued my partnership with you as we've worked through this policy for CSC3. And as Borough President, I'll seek to elevate your voices on education policy going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim.
Thank you. I think that education is really a block association issue, because I really built a whole platform around schools because I believe so strongly that the vibrancy of our neighborhoods and the future of our city depends on our ability to educate the next generation. And we are failing in our school system right now on several fronts. Number one, and I appreciate the shout out about the specifics of the integration of our middle schools in District 3. We were the first in the city to conduct, to get an approval on an integration plan for middle schools. And it obviously is all in a bit of a turmoil now with the pandemic, and what the future holds is likely going to be some additional changes. But the truth is that the way that schools are resourced right now is a specific threat to the school's, an individual school's ability to serve its students. And by that, what I mean is that a school's budget is comprised of a $5,000 per pupil amount of money when we have $34,000 per student in our DOE budget. So very little money is getting to the actual school. We need to change the way that we budget our schools. And I think the way that we do that is that we need to abolish mayoral control. We need shared control of our schools. And as borough president, I am going to continue to push on this issue because it is a football in Albany, and it has been so for many years. And it's abhorrent to me that our kids are the pawns in this game between the city and the state over the years that I've been involved in CEC3. And that's 6 years, 3 terms elected, 2 terms as president. So we need a borough president that is going to take the bull by the horns in terms of our school system, because it is critical that we keep families in our city, that we provide a space for our students to thrive. And if we can get that $34 billion into the hands of principals, we can do miracles.
Thank you. Lindsey.
I love going after Kim because I do agree with a lot of what she says on this issue, and I trust her expertise and the work she's doing. I don't think mayoral control can be viewed as a success over this last year in particular. Kids who were doing poorly ended up having a compounded issue of doing even worse, best as I can tell. And the places where there have been more opportunities is when we have community schools, we have programs that have wraparound services for our kids, have additional resources connecting kids to how to navigate the system, parents the same. And part of that is a resource issue, as was just mentioned. The state, and especially this governor, has been holding back funding that is owed to our kids in the city in foundation aid. And the hope is that through this federal aid that is coming into New York, that will actually get that to our kids. I think now is time to fight for it. I think we need to, rather than thinking about it, the first area that we hire more people in the city is to resource both through counselors, social workers, and the like around our kids, not just actively in schools, but all these issues are interconnected, and kids who are doing the poorest in our school system have a lot of issues to contend with. I fully believe in desegregating our school system. I think at the same time, the extent to which we can resource around community-based schools, so kids and families and parents, particularly in English as a second language households, can get the assistance they need. I mean, I'm talking to parents that had no idea how to navigate the middle school test system and the application process, because it's so opaque. And how do you change anything about your background and your situation if nothing is communicated in a way that's easy to understand? So I'd focus on middle school. I'd focus on full-time equivalents and supporting the fight to get more wraparound services for our kids and community-based schools, and the fight for desegregation of our schools as well.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks. It's an issue that's near and dear to me. My mother was a kindergarten teacher at PS 166 for a long time. So she is quite familiar with this issue. I've been quite familiar with it as somebody who went to K through 12 public schools myself. I believe very strongly that there are two big equalizers in our city right now that are going to bring us back. One is our public schools. The second is our transit system. So just on the public schools issue, there are a couple things that I've been really fighting for, both as a Community Board 7 leader, but also in my campaign. One is on the desegregation of the schools, and Kim has rightly led that charge in terms of CEC3. When it came to PS 199, our board passed a resolution that I helped champion that was incredibly important in integrating our schools and the neighborhoods here on the Upper West Side. The second thing I've been very focused on has been on the opening of the schools. And I believe in science. I believe in data. I have a day job. I work at the World Economic Forum. There are so many other cities across the world that have looked at how to open the schools responsibly. Our city has not done it. We decided we were going to do it and open in September. Whoever becomes borough president needs to make sure, even before they're inaugurated in January, that throughout the next few months, we are focused on making sure that every student is back in the classroom safely and responsibly. I care about it because of all the working people, especially working women who have been left out. I care about it because of the working people who have also been left out. I care about it because of the people who have not had adequate Wi-Fi in the shelter system. And I care about it because there are people, quite frankly, students who have not had an opportunity to get remote devices. And it's something that we need our kids back in the public schools. And it's something I will fight for and make a strong priority as your borough president. Thanks.
Thank you. Brad.
You know, it really is the shame of the city and the state that New York has the most segregated school system in the country. I mean, it's hard to believe after 67 years, Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, that holding came down, that we really haven't made much progress. I do want to thank Kim for all of her efforts. I think we need to look at the CEC lines themselves. They're redlined. They are gerrymandered to exclude certain populations. I'm proposing a bill in the state legislature to fix that, actually, I'm happy to say. On a more on point with the office I'm seeking, I want to do a few things. One, I want to create in the borough president's office what I'm calling a public school parent resource center, where public school parents can have the benefit of an expert to help them with the middle school application process, which is very Byzantine. I can tell you that from personal experience, in particular for lower income communities and communities without resources. Secondly, on another personal note, my daughter, who's 10, has dyslexia. We didn't find out until she was 9 and in 4th grade. I want to use the borough president's expenditure funds to screen every kindergartner in Manhattan for dyslexia. It costs less than 99 cents a kid to do that, and it takes less than 10 minutes to administer. But a world of knowledge and information for both parents and children would be the result. So we've got a lot of work to do and funding as well. I'm proud to have helped led that fight in Albany for $3 billion and more of aid, foundation aid for New York City public schools to finally realize the promise of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And I'm really standing on the shoulders of Senator Robert Jackson, who walked to Albany to make that fight. But now we've begun to realize it, and I'll keep fighting for that as borough president.
Thank you. We'll end up this segment with Ben.
I grew up with a single mom, and when I went to the Bronx High School of Science, I was on free and reduced school lunch, and I was so ashamed to be poor that I didn't eat. And that's why in the city council, I made lunch free for every single public school student. Now I've introduced legislation for universal after school, which would be coupled with dinner where we could end youth hunger. I've also introduced legislation initially carried by Congressmember Torres, now with me and Jamani Williams, to provide every single youth a job over the summer and throughout the year to end the schools to prison pipeline. As a new dad, I know that on the Upper East Side and Upper West Side, childcare starts at $30,000 a year. And something we can do to support our children and parents is universal childcare. That's why I won UPK for Manhattan when the mayor had no intention to do so. And recently we just announced 3K for all of Manhattan, from the tip of Manhattan all the way to Central Harlem, which didn't have it before. Now, the council members and the borough president have more money than all the PTAs combined, and a lot of people talk about the inequities in PTA funding, but there's inequities in how elected officials give out money. I've given money for laptops to every school in my district, regardless of whether or not there were kids in the neighborhood from the district. And when this pandemic started, every single kid went home with a laptop I bought them, but not schools on the West Side. I've introduced legislation with Gail Brewer, Jamani Williams to guarantee every single child a laptop. And with all the kids learning remotely this year, we could have desegregated our schools online. We could have opened up gifted enrichment programs, and the New York Post even agreed. As we head back to 100% in-person learning, I'm hoping that with every kid still having devices, that if we can pass this legislation, if not on day one, I will buy every kid a laptop, we can actually open up enrichment and gifted programs to kids in every school. We don't need, I appreciate any legislation at the state level, but we don't actually need legislation to redraw the lines. District 2, which I represent, runs from the tip of Manhattan and Brad's district all the way to my district on 100th Street, and it's gerrymandered around low-income communities of color in Chinatown, Lower East Side. And we don't need a state law. We just need a mayor who gives a damn, or we need to blow away mayoral control. But we can do it as part of the redistricting of the council, Congress, Senate, and Assembly districts. And the last piece is, I've been talking about this since 2013, whether a lot of folks are talking about what to do with the central business district. With so much vacant space, we could actually create magnet schools, open enrollment for kids all over the city to come get whatever education they're looking for. I think that could really open up opportunity for everyone.
Thank you.
I want to talk about the issue of crime. Many on the Upper West Side would submit that crime and mental health issues are closely related. Do you believe a crime issue needs to be solved by policing, or a mental health and economic opportunity issue that needs to be solved by social programs? Brad, if you could begin with responding to that question, please.
Sure. I think we've seen that more policing doesn't solve deep-seated societal problems like mental health. I mean, we need our first responders to be skilled in the area of mental health. And unfortunately, our NYPD are just not trained in that regard. We need to have crisis intervention teams, and they need to be funded, and they need to be the first people on the scene when a resident calls 911 about someone who's in danger of hurting themselves or others. You know, Kendra's Law is in place for a reason. We need more supportive and affordable housing, but we need to put folks who are on the street, who are street homeless, who've made a conscious and in some cases, Steve, a rational decision not to go in a congregate shelter because basically they're unsafe and pretty miserable places to be. Let's give them a supportive housing option that is worth and represents their dignity as a human being. I've seen programs like Breaking Ground in Times Square in my district that have been so successful in providing those options, wraparound services, mental health services. Please, the idea of putting our homeless into hotels temporarily does a disservice to everyone, but mainly to those individuals. And we have to do better, a real commitment, a real focus on this issue moving forward. I'm glad that the numbers suggest that street homelessness is dropping, but I imagine that's not going to be consistent as people fight their way through this pandemic. I'm glad that I passed the New York State Tenant Safe Harbor Act that keeps individuals in their homes during the pandemic and preventing them from eviction, and that we have money in the budget. We need to get it out the door so we don't contribute to homelessness by our inaction at the state and city level.
Thanks, Brad. Mark, please respond.
And did you want to jump in on something there?
I didn't know if we were switching the orders now, not going alphabetical.
Mark, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. Well, let's start with the data, which do show that there has been an increase in crime across various categories on the Upper West Side. It's very disturbing, nothing we can accept. It's up about 15% in the 20th precinct and about 4.5% in the 24th precinct. There's real differences across categories. Thankfully, no homicides in either precinct so far this year. Hate crimes are up in both precincts this year. And citywide, we have a dramatic rise in shootings. We can't ignore this. We have to fix this. We have to reverse these trends. And it's going to require us to act on every front. Fair and effective policing, yes, is one tool that we need, but it can't be the only tool. We must improve the city's response to mental health crisis, which has underemphasized treatment of more chronic psychiatric problems like schizophrenia, the kinds of conditions which do often drive homelessness. We have to improve our homeless policy directly, including better outreach teams, better shelters, which are safer so people don't feel they need to resort to staying on the street to keep safe. And we need to build more supportive housing, the kind of housing that has social services built in, which has been proven through rigorous research to draw people in and keep them from recidivism back into homelessness. I'm proud to have just about completed an incredible project to build 200 units of affordable housing on 108th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam in partnership with a great local nonprofit, the West Side Federation for Senior and Supportive Housing, Wishfish. This is the kind of project that we need all over the city in much greater numbers. We've done it in my district. And this is part of my approach to moving forward on every front to make every community safer, to have humane policy to end homelessness, to have much better support for people who are struggling with mental illness and addiction. These will be the kinds of balanced approaches that I'll take as borough president. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Kim, would you please respond to the question?
Sure. I want to start by just reiterating that I served as an auxiliary police officer in the 2-4 and come from a family of law enforcement and have spent 12 years as a mother living in Harlem and understanding the conditions in which our Black communities, low-income communities suffer from the circumstances of an economy that's built on systemic racism and really unjust practices that are not being solved by our elected officials and haven't been for many years. We are in the predicament we're in right now because of bad government, and people are desperate. Having said that, my neighbors and I need more police in many ways. We need more police on the streets to help us when there are crimes being committed, because police right now they don't feel empowered to do their work, and they are ignoring a lot of the crimes that are going on, and they are not being led properly by leadership in this city. So there is a sort of a cascading effect of bad community policing as a result of the conditions that we're all experiencing and have been experiencing for the last year. It's incredibly upsetting, but it is true. It can be true, both things at the same time, that we have brutality and bad policing on one hand, and systemic racism that's steeped into the structures of the NYPD, and over policing in our schools, and bad judgment. But we also need police when crimes happen. And what happened to me, my neighbor today, and what happened on my block today is a really good example of how desperate people want to be safe and how unsafe we feel. I don't feel safe. And that's not right. So I think that we definitely need a crisis intervention in terms of mental health, but we are in a crisis mode in terms of safety right now as well.
Thank you, Kim. Ben, would you like to respond to the question now?
17,000 children woke up in a homeless shelter this morning, together with 16,000 parents. There are more homeless children in our city than homeless single men. And that's the whole face of homelessness. Children, families, they never did anything wrong. We're not talking about mental health. We're talking about folks who got evicted. It's a symptom of the affordable housing crisis. When the mayor wasn't doing anything about this in 2015, I started the Eastside Task Force for Homeless Outreach and Services, gathering faith-based providers, nonprofits, city agencies to a table. The cost of sitting at the table is that you have to be willing to build services in the community on your block, in your building. And Senator Liz Krueger wanted in, so did Borough President Gail Brewer, and we've been working together ever since. A lot of elected officials like to talk about things, but actions matter. In my district on the Upper East Side, the reason you're not seeing what you're seeing in your part of the city is because when somebody is on the street in need of our help, we learn their name and we get them the services they need using everybody. So if they know them from the soup kitchen, we use those relationships to get them the services they need. There was a woman who used to spit at people, and we got her the services she needs. She's off the street. When there was a hotel that opened in my district, the same size as the Lucerne, we reached out to the operator. We connected them with every neighbor in the building. And sure, there may have been bad neighbors, but we were able to get through it without any of the problems, and men can stay. We built supportive housing across the street from where I live for women and children, and the public schools across the street welcome them, and that's where the kids are going now. We're building a shelter 3 blocks from where I live, and Community Board 8, the one I represent, where I have the most appointments, approved it near unanimously with only one abstention and one vote against. When it comes to taking care of the homeless, we've got a model that works in my district, and I want to do it for the rest of the city. So we're not leaving people to deteriorate on the street and decompensate. When it comes to mental health, which is what a lot of this, what folks are talking about, we need to start increasing access to mental health starting in schools. We have more school safety agents than psychologists and social workers combined. And that's just showing where our city's priorities are. We need to have school psychologists, social workers, so that the kids can have it, especially during this pandemic. When it comes to gun violence, we have the toughest state laws in the country, but we need federal action to stop the guns from pouring into our state from everywhere else. You've heard me talk about after school, about youth jobs, things that can end the schools to prison pipeline, and this would do a lot. The other pieces in the council, as a progressive caucus chair, we've invested in violence interrupters like Cure Violence, which dollar for dollar have reduced gun violence and the hotspots throughout our city. Between the homeless outreach, mental health, and gun violence programs that I'm talking about, we can make real changes like we have in my district for the rest of the borough.
Thank you, Ben. Lindsay?
So just starting by saying, violence is not acceptable. And people have a lot of real concerns about escalating gun violence, escalating, just violence in the city, hate crimes. I have concerns as the mother of an Asian American daughter and wife of an Asian American man, in particular, the escalation of hate crimes. I also come from, I was partially raised by a police officer, and while I have tremendous respect for service, and there are so many good cops, including the one that helped raise me, we don't need more cops. We need to better allocate the resources that we have. We should be focused on violent crimes as opposed to misdemeanors. And I think from the perspective of the borough president's office, and really how I spent especially the first decade of my career in New York, managing public spaces like Bryant Park, that had a real renewal and resurgence, both in terms of safety and in terms of broader success, is the best way that we can, in this job and in most ways, reduce crime in this city is by having more eyes and ears on the street. And one of the great saving graces of this last year was, at the very least, having outdoor dining in some respects, not just for the restaurants, but because you have more people out. And I've long maintained that one of the most unsafe things we did, particularly with respect to subway service, was shut it down overnight, because we created a specific cycle of time in the 24-hour day in this city where we didn't have program space. And that is when you have things that happen that are not positive. I mean, that's why at Bryant Park, we would do daily counts of men and women and children in the park. And the most conservative about being in public spaces and the public realm are women and children. And, there are many times where I haven't felt safe. And I think it comes down to both some of what Kim said earlier about rebuilding some trust, because there are a lot of people who see cops and think, I feel less safe, given the color of their skin, given systemic racism, the communities they come from. Members of my own family have felt that way. So we have, and at the same time, I think we've had a real lack of trust, and NYPD has moved out of a lot of situations where they should be front and center, and their resources and their presence should be felt and should be building trust in the communities. And so I think it's not that we need more cops, it's that we need more people in the city. We need to invite them back, and we need to build trust with the police force that we have. And, on the front of mental health, coming from a family that has had a lot of challenges, multi-generational issues with mental health, I also don't want to leave out addiction issues, because drug and alcohol is causing a huge percentage of comorbidities and a lot of violent crime in the city as well. And I think that would all be helped by more effective resources towards social work, as well as supportive housing and better, fewer congregate shelters and more permanent housing solutions for people.
Thank you, Lindsay. Elizabeth?
Sure, I'll close this out with just a few comments. I have been very intimately involved in this issue from my time as a community board chair, and also the person who has been looking at the Lucerne, the issue that's going on in our neighborhood, which I know is a public safety issue. I have put out a statement. I have advocated for what I call a community conversation, which involves bringing together members of block associations, members of the PD, members of the homeless community who are living in the congregate shelter, members of the community who can get things done. And we did this time and time again during the time that I was a community board chair. We need to make sure that whatever conversation we have is done in a way that brings together everyone. So we all know that, like many cities, New York has seen this spike in crime. It's a big issue, and it's something that whoever we elect, and I believe it will be me, is going to have to address it in the coming months here in Manhattan. It's the largest central business district, arguably in the world, certainly in the United States. But there are fewer people in commercial districts and offices. As we've seen, our transit ridership is at historic lows, and employees are just starting to return to work. So Manhattan feels really vulnerable right now. And we need to make sure that the answer is making sure our police are doing the right things, but also being creative about it and making sure public safety is a delivery that's rooted in neighborhoods and focused on communities that don't always feel served by communities, feel served by neighborhoods, including communities of color and women. And as I talk around the neighborhoods of Manhattan every day, I hear that same thing, that people don't feel safe. So I have a couple of ideas that are on my website, which is elizabethcaputo.com, and there's a 21 Bridges approach. They include localizing crime prevention interventions and also cut boxes, which are things that are going to be things that I think the borough president has a strong opportunity to get involved in and do, that I will do, and we need to make sure whoever gets elected to this job is doing things that are very innovative and also getting the job done for Manhattan. Thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Dee?
Our next and last question of the evening is on the topic of environment. What are your plans, your action items for promoting a cleaner, greener borough? And what can be done on the local level to address the climate crisis? And how will your office move this forward? We'll start with Ben.
Thank you very much for everyone who's been with us and for a well-run forum that is running on time. As co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, we've been fighting for our environment with every single step. I worked very closely with Costa Constantinides, our environmental chair, who's actually endorsed me for borough president, on something called Local Law 97, Climate Works for All, the Dirty Buildings Bill. And we actually had to fight the Real Estate Board of New York, and it was really easy for me to do that because I didn't take money from them. I even had to fight folks like 32BJ, and we were able to get it done. And it's because here in New York City, it's not our cars that pollute, it's actually our buildings, and buildings owned by Donald Trump. And one of the things that's incredibly cynical, because you can think about it and be like, well, we got the best law on the planet done, but then no sooner did we pass it, did the city council start to try to cut things out. And so one of my colleagues in the council I'm actually running against voted in favor of allowing fossil fuels, natural gas, if you add natural gas to your building, for that to be counted towards saving the environment, when we need to completely move past fossil fuels. And in fact, I'm in support of removing gas connects from new construction moving forward. And so that's just some of it. I want to make sure we're putting solar on every rooftop, particularly our schools and buildings. I want to channel the East River to put tidal energy, which we already have on Roosevelt Island, so we can develop energy right here. Honestly, the kids are my inspiration. We worked with them, and they feel this so much. And whether it's leading the global climate strike or kindergartners who came to me to ban pesticides from parks, which we actually just passed that law. And if you haven't passed a law by kindergarten, or in this case, these kids, it took 7 years, they're in middle school. If you haven't passed a law by middle school, you might be an underachiever in my district. But it's these same kids who were able to force Mayor de Blasio to adopt my ban on plastic bottles being sold in parks. And so I'm going to continue to work with the children, with the community. I'm going to continue to stand up to real estate developers and revenue and whoever I need to save our planet. And if you think that we're safe, just know that they've already started to roll things back. And this election is going to be a vote on this planet and whether or not you want to save it or let real estate make as much money as they can. Doing a legal flat piece, the greenest building is the one that's already there. And this goes back to protecting our historic districts too.
Thank you. Kim.
Wow, that was so much, Ben. I really appreciate all the detail. And I also really wanted to say that I concur completely that we need to listen to our children when it comes to putting this issue front and center. I am a marathon runner by sort of gig trade, if you will, and I'm running all 508 miles of the streets of Manhattan as part of my campaign because I want to make sure that I see and sense every nook and cranny in the borough and where there are opportunities to reduce vehicular street traffic by 20%, which is a goal that I have. Where our shorelines are being damaged, we really need to make sure that the project to complete the perimeter of Manhattan, improve the East River on the Harlem Riverside is a completed project, and we need to make sure that the Lower East Side is protected. Flooding is it's an existential threat to our island. So we need to focus on rainwater collection. I agree with solar energy, and I agree with any chance that we have with capital dollars to put in gardens and programs that help support green, more green space and green awareness in our city. But I do think that we need to talk a little bit about environmental justice, because where I live in Harlem, a 12-year-old just died a month ago because he had an asthma attack. Why did he have an asthma attack and die from it in 2021 is a question I think we all need to be asking, because he lives in a building that's crumbling, and he lives in a building with 8 family members in a 1-bedroom apartment, because there's likely lead in the water and asbestos in the walls, and we're not holding building owners and big companies accountable for the continued injustice in our communities, our low-income communities and communities of color, for all of the environmental impacts of poor construction and poor water. And we have to ensure that we look at it through the lens of equity in terms of environmental justice. That's really one of my top priorities as well.
Thank you, Kim. I see we all have a lot to say on this topic. Let's try to keep it to 2 minutes if we possibly can. Mark.
Thank you so much, Dee. This really is the challenge of our generation. It's a challenge that the federal government has to fight, but the government of this city has to fight. And there's a role for neighborhoods and block associations as well. I'm so proud of the legislation that I co-sponsored in the city council that put New York City at the forefront in reducing use of greenhouse gases by mandating that large buildings roll back by 80% their consumption of greenhouse gas energy by 2030. This is going to be a very complicated implementation. And as borough president, I will be on top of it to ensure we meet those goals. I'm also proud to have joined with the chair of the city's Environmental Protection Committee, Costa Constantinidis, in a successor bill that he sponsored, which now Ben is criticizing, related to fuel cells in hospitals. It's a pretty narrow issue, which we can spend time on if you want. We also need to improve our management of the waste stream, including recycling and sanitation. And we've got to reverse 2 terrible cuts to the budget that were a setback for that. First, a cut by 60% in the pickup of waste baskets on commercial streets. That's got to be reversed. That will be reversed, thankfully. Secondly, we need full restoration of composting. Again, that's going to be restored at least to pre-pandemic levels, but I want to go further. I want composting to be the default in every building in this city. I also want to add recycling of textiles as well. We need to do more to reduce our use of single-use plastics. I'm proud to be the sponsor of a bill that would require coffee shops to allow you to use your own cup to fill up coffee, as opposed to requiring you to expend a disposable single-use cup. We need to electrify the fleet of vehicles in this city. I see my time is almost up. I'm pushing legislation that will require the replacement of the entire 30,000 vehicle fleet of New York City with electric powered vehicles. We can do this and more for the sake of our planet. And these will be my priorities as borough president.
Thank you. Lindsey.
So 3 areas that we need to focus on in the Borough President's Office: residential, green infrastructure, and resiliency and environmental justice. On the residential front, I agree with much of what Ben has said. We need to move away from gas stoves, as wonderful as they may be for cooking. We need to move to easily adaptable fixtures that waste less water. There are all sorts of residential changes that could be made, that there are experts sitting in HPD, sitting in different agencies, just waiting to be given the opportunity to lead in this way. And I think we need to move as quickly as we can on that front, because our residential buildings are the key contributor. Our buildings are the key contributor to the climate crisis in the city. Green transit and infrastructure. I'm a full supporter of congestion pricing, and I'm a full supporter of accessibility on our MTA, because that's the only way that we're really going to get it really utilized to the degree that it should be. The majority of our subways are not accessible. And, you know, when I was in urban planning directly in my first decade in New York, I helped lay the groundwork and implementation for Broadway Boulevard at both Herald and Greeley squares and parts of downtown DOT plazas. And I think we need to move very quickly, both in biking, safe biking infrastructure, and linear park support. These are the kinds of things that, comparatively speaking, are low cost, can be traffic calming, and can give people more options. And increasing the infrastructure here increases the likelihood that people will choose it ultimately, because it makes it safer and easier to access. And thirdly, you know, I got into and have spent my whole career in some way, shape, or form in urban planning, because I think it's the most exciting way to resource people who've gone unresourced. But the history of urban planning is a racist one. And where are the two waste management sites in Manhattan? Upper Manhattan, in predominantly lower income communities of color. And that's how we build all kinds of infrastructure in this city and in this country. And a lot of the work will be to create a resilient waterfront, invest in infrastructure that benefits people and creates opportunities to interact with the waterfront. I live in Chelsea, and we took on water in Hurricane Sandy. So this is not far off. This is not in front of us. And we need to both prioritize and resource resiliency projects and environmental justice projects that focuses on people who've been left behind, which is a huge number of people.
Thank you. Now, Elizabeth needs to go to another event. So maybe, Elizabeth, you can combine the answer to this question with your 1-minute elevator pitch.
Sure, I'll be super quick. And I just want to thank you all for understanding tonight. It's been a pleasure talking to everyone. You all know me from my record of service from having run a community board here on the Upper West Side. To answer the specific question you're asking, there are 3 things. One is congestion pricing. I've worked at the World Economic Forum bettering public transportation and infrastructure. I've spent a career in public infrastructure that makes things safer and cleaner and greener. We need to make sure that we do more of that and make sure that congestion pricing gets implemented responsibly. And again, as borough president, that's going to be a top priority of mine. Second is a coastal resilience plan for all of Manhattan. So during Sandy, for all of us who lived here, we knew how vulnerable Manhattan was to storm surges and sea level rises. It was a huge thing. So we need to make sure that whoever is elected to this job understands the importance of implementing a comprehensive borough-wide climate resilience strategy for all of Manhattan. So that's the second thing. And then the third is really looking at dirty fuels. And one of the first projects I worked on when I was a community board member was looking at the number 2, number 4, number 6 heating oils throughout my neighborhood. We need to make sure we accelerate a phase out of those dirty fuels. And we need to make sure, again, buildings in Manhattan, which is something that the borough president has jurisdiction over, is a leading source of climate emissions. And we need to make sure that whoever is elected, make sure that that is a top priority. In terms of why I'm running, I bring 25 years of experience living and working here. I have been a community board chair. I have worked and lived here. I bring a life experience, and I also bring work in municipal infrastructure finance and in the private sector, which I think is going to be critically important in the days and months ahead as we build back this city. I really look forward to working with all of you. My team is going to stay on the call. My website is elizabethcaputo.com. We are really excited about all we can do for the city. We have a great team starting again at the neighborhood level, at the block association, and at the community board level. And nobody's going to be more of a community person for you than I will. And I really look forward to working with you in the days and months ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good luck with your next event. Brad, back to the question of a cleaner and greener New York City.
I feel like I'm missing an event that I should be at. Have you ever had that sinking feeling? This is such an important issue. My colleagues have all spoken, I think, admirably on it. I would completely agree with the need for resiliency on the west side. We got it working on the east side, but they've forgotten about the west side. And I'm actually taking steps in that regard. Plastics continue to be a big problem. I'm proud to have stood up for the city council in Albany and fought to reinstate the plastic bag ban that the council admirably passed. Plastic straws and stirrers. I've got legislation with Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal to do that at the state level. I certainly have been interested in the issue of small bottles. Those, your favorite Holiday Inn will give you those shampoo bottles that are just thrown away. We banned those in the state Senate this year. And clean water is so important. I've been fighting to make certain that the Hudson is clean and that the federal mandates are followed in that regard. But in addition to that, what the borough president can do, let's look at a Green New Deal for housing, 100% clean buildings, fight for 100% zero carbon pollution for all new commercial and residential buildings by 2025. Let's have the next borough president lock arms with the other four borough presidents and make that a requirement for every zoning application that comes through each of our borough presidents' offices. I think that would be a very positive step forward. And then finally, there really isn't anything more, with greater foresight than congestion pricing. I've been fighting for that for over a decade, fought for it in Albany. I'd like to see if we can extend it beyond 59th Street. Why should only 59th Street and below have the benefits? But here's the thing, ID. We don't want to see cars dropped off at 60th Street and crowd our neighborhoods on the Upper West Side. We need residential parking to combat that. And those public hearings that are going to occur over the next year with the new borough president are going to be key, including making certain that Manhattan residents get a break, especially if they leave the congestion pricing zone. They're going to be decongesting. They shouldn't have to pay, just like other world cities that have congestion pricing don't charge residents who live in the zone.
Thank you all.
So we've reached the point now where trying to be on time and respectful of everyone's schedule, that we would ask you for a 1-minute closing remark, a message you would like to leave, especially with those who are interested in the work of block associations on the Upper West Side. Kim, do you want to kick this off, please? 1 minute.
1 minute. Well, thank you. I'm Kim Watkins, and I'm the candidate that you want to elect as the next Manhattan Borough President because of my work as the leader of District 3 schools. And that is because District 3 is a small version of Manhattan itself. There is so much integrity and beauty and incredible warmth of people and community in our communities on the Upper West Side and affluence, but we are struggling in the northern part of District 3, just like Upper Manhattan continues to struggle, and in some parts of the Lower East Side as well. I am a candidate that is focused on issues that are bread and butter issues for people: our childcare, our healthcare, our school system, safety in our neighborhoods, and equal pay for equal work. We spend tens of millions of dollars on high stakes testing, but we can't afford permanent nurses in our schools. We put $100 million into that floating island on the Hudson, but we can't afford elevators that work in NYCHA buildings. I will be a borough president that stands for the issues that matter to regular people. And my website is runwithkim.com. I look forward to talking with you and working with you in the days and months ahead.
Thank you, Kim. Mark?
Thank you so much, Steve. And Chris and Dean, congrats again on building this really important new institution for the West Side. I hope it serves as a model for other communities. As Borough President, it will be my honor to partner with you to help to grow and to take on the challenges of this moment so that we come back as a borough from this public health crisis, from the economic shock, from the crisis of inequality, stronger, so that we come back healthier, more just. I'm going to lead for this borough, and I'll draw on my background as a public school teacher, as the founder of a community development credit union, as a council member who scored historic victories like establishing right to counsel for tenants facing eviction in housing court. But as we work on these big challenges, the voices of neighborhoods, the voices of community leaders, and the voices of block associations are going to be critical for the future of public space and the future of the social challenges that we've been discussing tonight. So it's been an honor to be part of this conversation. I look forward to working with you for many years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Ben?
Councilmember Ben Kallos. I'm running for Manhattan Borough President because everywhere else in America, people are struggling to get out. But here in New York City, we're struggling to stay, and I believe we can fix that. I believe we can invest in our schools. As a lifelong tenant, we can stop settling for elected officials who take money from real estate developers just to sell us out. We can have somebody who actually has always refused real estate money, always will, and will always fight for you. I've helped start block and neighborhood associations as a council member, fund most everyone in my district, and even fund preservation organizations on my side of town and on the west side when they didn't get funding from my colleague on this call. As borough president, we can do more. We can stop Billionaires Row from taking over the Upper West Side, and we can save Central Park. We can help homeless off the streets. Part of the reason I've been endorsed by our Congresswoman Carol Maloney, 80 labor unions from nurses to our bus drivers, and I have the support of block association leaders on the east side and even on the west side. I'm hoping you'll join our team at kallos.nyc. Call us at 212-960-3440 or email me at bkallos@kallos.nyc. I have to drop because we're fighting a blood center commercial conversion of a residential block in my district. I have to drop for the community board meeting, but I want to thank everyone for having me, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, Ben. Brad?
Thank you so much, Steve, Chris, and Dee, for this great conversation. To my colleagues who've been really respectful and smart about their engagement, and so tribute to them too. I just want to say that I'm running on my record as a state senator over the last 9 years, as a community board chair for 3 years, and a community board member and a community activist. As a preservationist, you know, your conversation earlier about historic district really touched a nerve because we see all across our borough a disregard for history. I've been fighting over on 42nd Street to preserve a historic interior at the McGraw-Hill building. I don't know if you've been in it in the last few years. It's like walking into the Emerald City, this Art Deco masterpiece, which is being disassembled and destroyed because the Landmarks Preservation Commission didn't see fit to preserve it. Or the Damaris building on Fifth Avenue, historic car showroom being disassembled and destroyed as we speak. Or let's think back to the last interior that was remaining in New York City by Frank Lloyd Wright on Park Avenue. That was calendared, an attempt was made to calendar that to preserve the interior space, but the developer moved in the middle of the night and destroyed it. We really need more effort on preserving our history, and I just want to mention that. But I have been endorsed by our local Congressman, Jerry Nadler, Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal, two former borough presidents, Virginia Fields, and of course, a whole range of elected officials, including State Senator Robert Jackson. Very, very happy to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lindsey?
Well, this has been a really fun conversation, and I'm really doing this not just because the job is what I've been engaged in for my whole career in urban planning, but because I think this is a unique moment for the borough and for the city to recover and to focus on issues of livability. I think what we have seen is fighting between, in many cases, a mayor and a governor who leave a lot to be desired about how we actually live in this city, how we keep each other safe, how we interact, how we build a livable city based on land use and zoning, how we keep it clean based on sanitation, and how we keep it safe in part because of how we program it. And between my work managing public spaces and public parks, pedestrianizing parts of Broadway, working in municipal finance to fund infrastructure, and then working at the state level, ultimately as the Jobs and Housing Secretary, it's been the great joy of my life to do this work. Everything from helping pass paid leave and the $15 minimum wage, in addition to overseeing the Office of Storm Recovery, which continues to administer funds post Sandy in New York, and overseeing the state's recovery work in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, both in emergencies and in planning to respond to the biggest challenges we have. That's the fun stuff for me. And working at a bid is not the same thing as the important work that you've been engaged in, but a lot of the interests are the same in making our communities livable and having greater connectivity to each other and valuing what's best about our neighborhoods. And that's why I got into this field of urban planning, because Jane Jacobs changed my life reading The Death and Life of the Great American Cities. So I'm excited to be here. I'm honored, and it would be the great honor of my life to do this job at this time in this really momentous period for New York and Manhattan.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you. You all honor us by joining us, and we wish you all the greatest luck. Dee?
Thank you. Thank you. To our, we wish you all a good evening. Thank you very much. And to our Upper West Side neighbors, please get in contact with us at the Upper West Side Coalition of Block Associations and Community Groups. And if you're interested in joining the Upper West Side Coalition or want to learn more about block associations or thinking about starting your own block association, we want to hear from you. Our email address is upperwestsidecoalition@gmail.com. And this forum will be posted to our website, upperwestsidecoalition.org, along with last week's forum with the candidates for City Council. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
night.
Good
Good night.
night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. And it's a wrap.
I'm watching YouTube.